I hope this works. So I just wanted to make a review here of a book that I just finished today called Lincoln's Loyalists, Union Soldiers from the Confederacy. And the subject, as the subtitle implies, is white Southerners during the Civil War who fought for the Union. And according to the book, there's an estimated 100,000 white men who fought for the Union but were from the South, out of 1 million white men who were from the South but fought in the Civil War altogether. That represents a 10% loss of manpower from the Confederacy and a significant gain. Hey, Wendy. My cat's trying to get on the bed. A significant gain to the strength of the Union, which means that these men, the Loyalists as they're called, or Unionists, were probably a significant part of the reason why the Union won the Civil War. And I choose the word Union deliberately because after reading this, I can't refer to the Confederacy as the South anymore. Now that I know that 100,000 Union soldiers, at least, that's just the ones we know of, were from the South. And that's just the white men. You know, it's just not taking into account the black Southerners who fought. Anyway, so to talk about those men themselves, at first, it seems that most of them were poor farmers or people like that. People who couldn't afford or own slaves and therefore didn't really have much of a reason to support secession. Now, of course, there were poor farmers and others who fought for the Confederacy as well, but the point I'm getting at is that these were men who did not support secession. And the reasons were many and varied. Some of them, these men were referred to as galvanized Yankees, a term which went the other way, too, by the way, were men who had originally enlisted in the Confederate Army, but who had been captured and taken prisoner and were offered mercy if they switched sides and fought for the Union instead. Some of them had other reasons for joining the Union, but the biggest reason, and the reason why most of them decided to fight for the Union, was sheer loyalty. They saw themselves as Americans and citizens of the United States before they saw themselves as Southerners or citizens of Alabama or the Carolinas or whatever. And they opposed secession because they saw it as an attack on the United States and a rebellion against the United States. So that's the men themselves and the reasons why they fought. To talk about their fighting themselves, some of them officially joined up with the Union Army, either by forming their own regiments or enlisting in regiments from other states. And some of them fought for the Union just by forming local militias or vigilante groups, rather than officially joining the Army. And some of them actually fought on the frontier against Indians and marauders and so on. Native Americans, sorry. And that was significant because even though they weren't actually fighting against Confederates, they were relieving other men who would have had to fight on the frontier so they could go fight the Confederates. So what they did, however small it was pretty significant in terms of the Union's overall victory in the Civil War. Now, where was it going? Oh yeah, so the book starts out by talking about how when the war broke out and when some southern states seceded, Lincoln still saw those states as part of the United States of America, and saw the secession as an act of a group of dissident rebels. And so when he called for volunteers, he was calling for volunteers all over the country, including the South. many Southern governors said, you will not get a single man from our state, or whatever. But it turns out that there were Southerners from every single state in the Confederacy who fought for the Union. So those governors apparently didn't understand, were making too big assumptions about the people in their states, because there were Unionists in every state in the Confederacy who supported the Union in one way or another. So to talk about the book itself, some things I liked about the book is that it talked about this subject, which we don't hear about a whole lot. It got me interested. It made me want to know more about this, and I'm hoping to find more opportunities to learn more about white Southerners who fought for the Union. I also like how he pointed out that we don't hear a whole lot about them, and how they don't often get the credit they deserved. Something I wasn't too happy about, though, is that he overdid it on that point. I'm glad he made the point. I agree with the point, and so on. But it got to a point where I was like, okay, you said it. We get it. Let's talk about. Let's go into more detail about these men and stop talking about how they don't get credit, because you've made the point that they don't get credit. I get it. I understand it. So I think he kind of overdid that a little bit. But still, I can understand why, though, because there aren't too many other people who talk about this, and it is a story that, in my mind, needs to be told, because it could change attitudes about why the Union won the Civil War, and attitudes about the South, and so on. Some reasons why, at least according to the book, why they don't get a lot of press or a lot of credit. One is that they didn't get a lot of acknowledgement even after the war. A lot of them didn't get the pensions they were promised. They were seen as traitors by their neighbors, and were in many ways victims of radical Reconstruction after the war was over. And some of them even became reluctant to give themselves credit, and even began wondering if they had done the right thing by fighting for a union that now wasn't paying them much attention. And I think another reason is that Reconstruction became the focus for a lot of Southern politicians, and Northern politicians for that matter. And they weren't too concerned with figuring out who came from where, who had fought for the Union. So I think that was another part of it. And then after that, it just became, when the myth of the lost cause in the South came about, the romanticization of the Confederacy and of the South, it kind of became common practice, I think, for people to view the South as a whole as the Confederacy, and to over-romanticize the whole lost cause and noble Southerner fighting for his homeland. Although technically these Southerners were also fighting for their homeland, they just saw their homeland as the United States rather than the state of North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, you name it. But yeah, so this book talks a lot about them and the kind of fighting they did and where they came from, and really does a good job, I think, of giving credit to these men who don't get a lot of credit, but who were instrumental in the defeat of the Confederacy and the victory of the Union. And so, yeah, the name of the book, again, is Lincoln's Loyalists, Union Soldiers from the Confederacy. It's by Richard Nelson Current, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has any kind of interest in the Civil War, in Abraham Lincoln, in the South, or even just in history in general. And, yeah, that's all I have to say for now about it. Thanks for watching, all of you who did so. Talk to you later.